today we have for you one of probably the most famous names on the martial arts scene in Queensland, I think it's fair to say. Not just Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, but multiple disciplines. We had his wife on the other week, so we are rapt to be able to present to you Geordie Lavers-McBain. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm not sure about how famous I am, but thank you very much.
Awesome, man.
Oh, you're famous in our community.
Absolutely, man. And that's what matters. And like Jessica was saying, you've got like 20 black belts or something crazy like that. Is that true?
Yeah. 27 now.
Jeez.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, so what is that?
Yeah, I've just always loved training. I don't like to restrict what I learn. So I try and train with everyone I can and learn everything I can. The more you learn, the easier it is to pick up things. It's kind of like if something's real, it's usually very similar, and then you just look for unique differences. And then the uniqueness either depends on whether it's absolutely genius or something sort of focused on just that area that it might have come from, or if it's just absolute garbage and just made up.
So are some of those black belts absolute garbage then? Like you got them early, let's say, and you're like, oh no, now I realize that black belt is not going to serve me. You know, is that the case?
No, I think every black belt I've earned has served me in some way. And it is interesting that some things that you think may not be useful for you turn out to be quite useful later on. Say, for example, how you would strip a grip in a traditional martial arts style. So say someone gets a grip and you're going to strip it off in, say, a traditional Kung Fu style or Japanese Jiu Jitsu. What actually happens is when you put on a gi, it's irrelevant because the difference in a gi is when I put my thumb and my finger in a gi, there's still material between my thumb and finger. But these old systems often came from fighting in armor where people could fully enclose their finger and thumb together, which means that a normal judo strip or a jiu-jitsu strip doesn't work anymore. So that creates interesting techniques which have come from these old style techniques. And then when you put people in, like if you've got a backpack on and someone grabs your backpack, a lot of your techniques that you use to break that grip off won't work because of where your thumb is. So if you go back to these old techniques, you can actually find some answers there. And that becomes really relevant for if you're wearing a backpack or if you're in, you've got a tactical vest on or you've got plate armor on as a soldier. But it would have been irrelevant in, say, Vietnam for a soldier because they weren't wearing armor then. So if you were to totally disregard all these techniques that aren't currently valid, you actually lose information. Whereas if you can focus on what works now, retain what used to work, then later on, if it does become relevant again, you've still got it in the memory bank. You've still got it in the sort of technical, tactical file of techniques that you have.
That's super interesting.
Wow. So can you run us through, Geordie, what some of these black belts are in? Bear in mind, we only probably have about 20 seconds left. So 20, we're going to run out of time if you list them all. But yeah.
Jiu-jitsu, BJJ, judo, some traditional Japanese styles of jiu-jitsu, karate, taekwondo, kung fu, sort of subgroups of all those where they sort of intersect and go across. So I've got black belts in sort of weapon arts. I've got black belts in striking arts, and I've got black belts in grappling arts, and then some of the ones that sort of mix between them. So I get a lot more white belts than black belts, and there's a lot of systems out there that I've only just sort of touched on. I started doing Salat earlier this year, and even I've got some ground in, say, Filipino martial arts. There is some similarities, but there is a lot of differences, and even within the different styles of Salat. But they have a really interesting there's a lot of interesting skills within it. One of the most interesting ones for me was there's a good emphasis on ground versus standing fighting, which is probably the only like if you're thinking about maybe like spider guard or something where I'm standing, you're on the ground, there's some emphasis there. Fighting MMA, someone's on their back, someone's standing. But I feel that like Silat has maybe gone a little bit deeper into some of that stuff than perhaps Jiu-Jitsu and MMA has gone. So there might be some interesting things to get from that. So I'm finding that interesting. And in that, I'm only a white belt. So just a beginner.
You're continuing, despite all of your level of proficiency or level of expertise in all the other martial arts, you're continuing to evolve and still seeking out to become like a white belt in new disciplines, yeah?
Yeah, 100%. Like I said, I've got more white belts than black belts. I'm certainly really interested in trying to find those connections, trying to find that information that doesn't exist in the current sort of location where it is. Before Jiu-Jitsu, I did shoot wrestling. I did shoot wrestling for over 10 years. We had a lot of heel hooks and neck cranks and finger locks and all sorts of other stuff in that. And what's really interesting is back then I was doing a lot of heel hooks and neck cranks and stuff, and no one else was. And then the revolution sort of has recently come in Jiu-Jitsu where everyone's like really interested in heel hooks. And what's interesting about that is even though I've been practicing these things for a very long time and been doing them, there's such a development of that direction right now that, you know, it supersedes everything that I'd learned before. There's probably just one or two tricks I might still have, but that's about it. I also train with Toshi Ito in submission arts wrestling, which is also another Japanese style catch wrestling. And they've got a lot of different answers as well. So if you stop looking and learning, you just stop evolving.
Yeah, I had the most amazing experience. We run this event called the Monthly Masters, right? And it's for people over 30, obviously, masters in jiu-jitsu. We get together, open mats in different gyms around Melbourne, right? I go there last weekend and I'm rolling this guy. He's a white belt. So I call him out. I'm like, I need an easy round. This guy is like a rock, right? While I'm rolling with him. He's at least as old as me, like 48, 49. Anyway, he feels like a rock. And before I know it, like he's got me all twisted up. And like, I'm like, you're not, and he tapped me standing like this, right? He tapped me. I'm like, you're not a normal white belt, are you? And he's like, he said, I've been doing Aikido for a long time, right? He got me. Like, the game started pretty much on the ground, I think. Somehow we ended up on our feet and he tapped me standing, and that's never happened. And my view, for example, of Aikido was, you know, they don't seem to be that all that, you know what I mean? But now I'm eating my words because I'm seeing that these other martial arts, like I have rolled other Aikido people and had no problem. But this guy just destroyed me and I was using all my purple belt jiu-jitsu stuff. He got me back up onto my feet from the ground. And I couldn't even tell you how the whole match went, but it was all Aikido. He wasn't using jiu-jitsu. And it really worked. And I was very shocked. And he did it again after that. So, you know, I was very humbled. Yeah.
Oh, the moral of the story is don't look for an easy roll, Anton.
Yeah, that's a good story. I like Aikido. Most jiu-jitsu people only think that there's like a wrist lock this way and a wrist lock that way. Whereas in reality, there's a wrist lock this way, that way, this way, that way. And there's so many different ways to do it. That if you were to, and there is some fantasy in Aikido, there is some fantasy, and it really depends on what era of Aikido that you're learning from. So for example, a style like Yoshinkan Aikido was like pre-World War II, and therefore Ushiba, who was the master of it, was still sort of focused a lot more on the practicality. He learned off a guy called Takeda, who was kind of like Miyamoto Musashi, went all around Japan challenging people to fights and duels. But after World War II, Ushiba was pretty profoundly impacted by the loss of Japan and went far more down a spiritual path, which is why it really depends on what sort of Aikido that you're learning and the mindset. All the people I've learned Aikido off had different backgrounds. I trained off a few different guys. Stephen Boyce, who's also a boxing trainer, Ron Vrieken, who's also a Kyokushin black belt and kickboxer, Paul Kale, who's a soldier, jiu-jitsu black belt as well. So all the people I've done Aikido with already had a practicality mindset in mind and how to apply it under resisting people. One of my favorite ways to pass close guard is put someone in Kodogaeshi or a twisting wrist lock, and then they just open their legs and I pass their guard. So it's a lot easier than breaking the legs open.
So where's Steven Seagal in the Aikido spectrum? Where does he fit in?
So Steven Seagal has some legitimate claims. He was one of the first Westerners to open up a full-time dojo in Japan. He's a legitimate seventh dan in Aikido. The problem people have is if you're 80% real but 20% wacky, everyone focuses on the wacky. So he's definitely 20% wacky, you know. So
I love you, man. That's so well said. I think people feel the same way about me, actually. Now that
well, it's the same with nearly every martial arts style has really good stuff, but if you focus on the other stuff, it becomes kind of less real. So if you look at like BJJ, we all know BJJ. So the concept of tactically pulling guard in any environment apart from a sport jiu-jitsu match would be very easily argued that that's a bad idea. You know, inverting, going upside down, doing all these sorts of things. And the reason these sorts of things exist, I refer to as a concept of technical incest, where you have a technique which is created to beat another technique, which is meant to beat another technique within the one art. And then you have this inbred technique that only lives and works in this one art.
Amazing.
And due to that, it's misshapen, it's misformed, it can't work anywhere else. And, you know, if you want to do jiu-jitsu because it's your tennis, that's fine. But if you want to do jiu-jitsu because the guy told you was teaching you self-defense and combat and fighting, it's kind of like the tennis instructor saying that they teach stick fighting. In stick fighting, you have an overhand, a forehand, a backhand, an underhand technique, athletic footwork, hand-eye coordination, fitness, even aggression. However, you're not learning how to hit another human. You're learning how to hit a tennis ball. And tennis can help stick fighting, but it doesn't work the other way around. And if that is your purpose, if your purpose when you train martial arts, with whatever style it is to defend yourself, and then the classes don't focus on that purpose, you have to find that purpose yourself while you're training. You have to find what's relevant to you and what's not. Discard, well, not discard, but maybe place some techniques to the side. You might need them later on. You might be able to find a new purpose for them, and your purpose in life might change, but don't necessarily fall into the trap of missing what your purpose is. Because when you do, if you're training with, say, the specific goal, you want to be an MMA fighter, so you're doing jiu-jitsu, you keep turning up to gi classes, they keep doing lapel chokes all the time, and then you lose your reason for training, you're going to end up thinking, I don't like jiu-jitsu. And what will happen is you'll end up quitting, you know, probably around blue belt. It seems to be the place that most people quit because maybe your purpose wasn't met. You didn't get to focus on your purpose yourself. Whereas if you go to class and you see these, you know, lapel chokes and so on, and you go, well, that's okay, I'll learn these because maybe later on this will be relevant. But I also want to make sure I can try and work out, is there some use to this when I'm focusing on MMA, for example? Is there some way I could cross across someone's shoulder and punch them rather than choke them? Then if you find that purpose, then I think you'll get some reward from your training and probably keep training for a long time.
Geordie, we nearly always ask this of our guests, and I'm just mindful of time, but how did you discover, maybe let's just focus on jiu-jitsu, because if we say how you started all martial arts, how long have we been here? I don't know. But yeah, just tell us how you got started, how you discovered jiu-jitsu.
Sure. Well, I've been doing shoot wrestling for about 10 years. In that time, I'd sort of been visiting different places and training with different people. I did my first jiu-jitsu class, I think, in '95 with Vince Perry. And Vince wasn't super involved with jiu-jitsu then. I think he was a blue belt under John Will, but he was also teaching Jeet Kune Do, and he also had some sort of other interests. I really enjoyed it, but it was a long drive. It was probably took me an hour and a half, hour 45 just to get there and see him. Yeah. And it wasn't offering me that much more than what I was already getting shoot wrestling. In fact, it was kind of a little bit restricting in some ways, but it was probably a little bit more universally known and accepted instruction. So I started training. I did a little bit of training with him. And it used to be funny because we used to laugh because when he'd advertise blue belt and BJJ, which in the mid 90s that was pretty high, and I would advertise black belt and shoot wrestling, and so people would see the two and not realise that that the black belt and shoot wrestling didn't. Well, it probably took me a little bit longer than it would take to get a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, but it didn't take longer than a purple belt. So that's where I sort of touched there. I did some John Will seminars, was part of John Donahue's organisation for a little bit, but just jiu-jitsu wasn't really ticking too many boxes for me at the time. We ran some tournaments up in Queensland that was we call them open mat tournaments where you could do judo, jiu-jitsu, any shoot wrestling, any catch styles, anything else that was around, and you could go in it. And we were doing pretty well, so we didn't see the need. And then I was going to the International College of Martial Arts on the Gold Coast, and I met Daniel Lima, and we became friends. We used to wrestle a lot with each other. And then when Daniel first came here, he was just a student. He didn't really have much money, and one of the ways that I thought I could sort of help my friend was getting him to run a seminar at my club. And he came out, and the good thing about Daniel is he's very technically detailed. So I remember we were doing armbar, and he ended up having like 15, 16 details and just how to do the armbar the first time we did it. And then we did another one later on. He had another 7 extra details he didn't talk about the first time. And so I went, well, this is really good. I like this. And I really like Daniel. So we sort of worked out, maybe this would be something to do. Maybe my shoot wrestling coach had gone by that stage. I had no one to learn from directly. So I thought, this would be really good. So Daniel and I started together. I think I was his like 3rd or 4th student in Australia. And I trained with him. I ended up being his first black belt here. I got my blue belt after a month of training. I actually failed my blue belt the first time I went for it. So I could have got it in 2 weeks, but I didn't, because we'd rolled a fair bit with each other.
I see.
And when it came to the time where he was like, "Oh, I'm going to test you for your blue belt," I just sucked that day, just really bad. He said, "Well, I can't give it to you after that." And I went, "No, I don't want you to." And then 2 weeks later, we trained again, and I did quite well. So
amazing!
Yeah,
what a story!
Not that quick.
Daniel Lima for bringing you as a powerhouse across to the jiu-jitsu side, and and I guess like for me, like what I'm fascinated by here is like you're a incredibly driven human being, and not only that, where some people would say like focus your energy, you're like, no, fuck that. I'm going to go wide. I'm going to go and immerse myself in as many different things as I can, and not only that, like achieve a really high level in them, and then connect the dots and look for patterns and look for things that are useful and look at things that may be useful in different, like there's so much depth to your view of martial arts that a lot of people that we talk to haven't gotten to and may never get to because they probably focus so intensely. Do you think there's drawbacks to this approach that you have versus the full focus, in one thing?
Well, I guess you could say I'm focused on combat. Like a little bit of knowledge about other things, but when it comes to combat, I'm pretty focused. I look at it kind of like this: if I have to compete, like if say someone wanted to compete against me in something, and I knew something they didn't know, I'd use that. So if I'm capable of using another skill that you don't know, then that's going to give me an advantage. In a more open arena, if you don't know judo, I'll throw you. If you don't know wrestling, I'll take you down. If you don't know jiu-jitsu, I'll armbar you. So I sort of look at that. Like, I know lots of high-level jiu-jitsu black belts that probably couldn't pass an orange belt in judo because they don't know that you need 16 throws to get your orange belt. I know heaps of high-level black belts that wouldn't know 16 throws. And doesn't mean they can't win their tournament, but can they win anything else? Can they win any grappling tournament? Or is it just the specific sport that they've trained for?
So
I'm not.
You're a master.
What was that?
You're a master of combat. You like zoom out. It's not that you're doing lots of different things, but they all focus or orbit around combat.
And it's interesting because if you look at, say, grappling, for example, grappling versus grappling under a specific set of rules is a really interesting environment. For example, like you look at judo, the submissions you're allowed to do in judo are arm locks and chokes. And when we run combatives tournaments with the Army, that's the two main things. You're allowed to do leg locks, but they actually don't win. So if you leg lock someone, it actually ends up being a restart. So because the idea in combat is if you break my leg, that's great, but maybe I'll shoot you or stab you. But maybe I won't. So we won't say that it's not allowed, but we just won't say it means anything.
Okay.
And then, but if I break your arm, it's going to be hard to use that. So we actually have arm locks as a equivalent of like a judo wazari or a half point. So if you get someone an arm lock, we stop the match, we restart it from standing, we go on again. Because the idea is that that combat advantage would be pretty good in real life. But the problem is that people always sort of forget, and this is something else that's sometimes forgotten in training, is once I put you in a Kimura, once I put you in an Americana or an armbar, what next? Like, what do we do next? Where do we put your arm after I've broken it? Yeah. How do I maintain control of you? Because you're probably pretty pissed now. I broke your arm. Yeah. There's so many examples of people getting their arms broken and fighting on. You look at Jacara back in the day versus Hodger Gracie, or you look at Henzo Gracie getting his arm broken. Breaking someone's arm's not the end. No. So the idea would be, yeah, if I can choke you, then I'll put you to sleep. That would be near the end. But something else to take in consideration with a choke is that the person's going to wake up pretty soon. Yeah. So if I put you in a choke, it's going to take me 3 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, depending on how good my choke is. But let's say I'm doing it well, 3 seconds. So if someone's within 18 meters of me, they'll probably be able to get to me before I finish the choke on the person I'm doing it. So in a multiple opponent situation, it might be better to just break the person's arm and move on. If I'm choking them, 3 seconds later, yep, they're asleep. Then I put them down, and we've seen in nearly every tournament, people wake up pretty quick from that. They do. So then I'm going to have this other person, and if they're behind me, they're going to continue forwards. So in a hierarchy of submissions, I would say probably joint break first, preferably upper body so that they can't use weapons on me with that part. Then it'd probably go choke, and then it'd probably go like cervical dislocation. So not just a neck crank, but actual like a neck break. Oh, wow. Wow, you've got... That would be the hierarchy of it. But of course, it depends on what, someone bumps into me at Subway, you can't do any of those. But it's good to know that hierarchy of where it's heading, how fast it can happen, and what situation. And obviously, you have to look at the law or the rules of engagement or whatever else sort of is surrounding you. Each state in Australia has slightly different laws in self-defense. So it's important to know where you are and sort of just follow through with that. And as I said, remember what to do. Once you break an arm, what's next? What are you going to do after that breaks?
Just let me, I see you at Subway, walk other way. Got it.
I'm very glad I've chosen a quiet meeting room at work to have this conversation. So I'm not sure what.
Well, the other thing with like breaks are like when I talk about submissions when I teach, and again, not everyone wants training with me because everyone's got their own sort of thing that they're after. My purpose is the reality of combat and everything. And I don't talk about arm bars or shoulder locks. I talk about arm breaks and shoulder breaks because it tells me what direction I should be heading in when I do a technique. So if someone's pretty tough and you can handle that arm cranking up behind your back, then that's some sort of yoga flexibility that comes in. But if I understand how it is to dislocate the humerus from that joint, then I understand what direction I'm traveling in to do my submission. And the reason you're tapping isn't due to pain compliance now, it's due to the reality of understanding that, yes, the arm's going to break any moment now. So that should be our goal when we do an armbar. Our armbar shouldn't be that it's putting pain in someone's elbow. It should be that if I don't tap, my arm's going to break. Yeah. And you ask anyone at the elite level of competition, they don't tap due to pain. They only tap due to thinking, yep, I'm going to get my arm broken if I don't. So if your focus is on the arm lock and the pain compliance, you're actually missing the original purpose of why we're doing these techniques and where we should be heading towards. And then, people tap faster, quicker and safer because they don't get some strain they didn't understand was about to happen due to just the ability to lock out the pain.
I love it.
Just changing direction, Geordie, as I mentioned, we had your wife Jess on last week, and I think we asked this question of her. How are things for you guys as a couple? She's your coach, obviously. Sorry, you're her coach, I should say. Like, how does that how does that sort of play out, like at home, and what's your?
Yeah, so when we train, we train. When we're in class, I'm the coach, and she does what you would do if your coach told you to do something. Because she's an athlete, sometimes coaches get athletes to do a lot of physical fitness and a lot of different things. And I have high expectations of my athletes, and it's no different for her. She's competed. She's fought in the ring. I think she's got 87 titles in 8 different combat sports.
Wow.
Including striking, grappling, and everything in between. So it's a very, we sort of separate that, and that's, I'm the coach. I was a coach first. That's how it is. I get her to do things she doesn't like to do. Before we started dating, she wanted to watch a boxing fight one night, and I told her if she watched it, then she wasn't going to be allowed to fight, and she couldn't come to the gym for a week. And so she came and trained, and she was upset, but she still got to watch the fight after it. And it's those hard calls that a coach has to make to get the most out of their athletes. So yeah, so that's pretty good. But when we're at home, we're at home. So, then I don't even mind if she complains about me after. But she can't complain about me when we're there, or complain to me. But after, I don't mind. It's like, yeah, you like to complain about any coach.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we have a really good balance there. I want her to achieve as much as she can. I might have earned black belts and different things and everything else. And in the end, it's not that hard to do that. It's just time. Whereas you can spend all the time in the world, doesn't mean you're going to win a title in anything. And so I would say that she, of both of us, is more skilled than me. I'm just better at seeing what to do. So I'm better at the coaching role. She's better at the doing role. And that's probably the best balance for us. And I want her to be able to achieve everything she can. If she can get to the Commonwealth Games, get there. She's won a couple of world titles in different sports. It's not the end of her career at all. I want to see how far she can get and support her as far as I can, and not put any roadblocks in the way. And anything I can do to help. Some things I don't coach her. Some things I know I'm not the expert. And for me to try and step into different roles, the same with all my students. If I pretend to be the expert in everything, then they're not going to be able to achieve the most that they can achieve. So there's certain things that I'm not the expert in, and then I try and outsource it. But I also try and learn myself, because I want to help that next generation and the generation after that to get as good as they can. So I try and learn everything I can and be the best supporter I can.
It's wonderful. On the subject of learning, like, you are obviously masterful at learning. Like, that's something you've been able to do, is just kind of immerse yourself into things. Like, what kind of hacks, tips, or what's your philosophy around learning that's worked for you so far?
Know your purpose, know your desire. There's a couple of funny quotes you could use. What's the average time someone takes to get a black belt? Well, the average person doesn't get a black belt, so it doesn't matter about that. Don't expect to be good when you get your black belt, expect to be good to get a black belt. So if you just focus on doing things well, understanding things well, relating them as much as you can to what relates to you, it's going to help. Be able to compartmentalize things and then also be able to combine them. It's interesting. There's a lot of mnemonic techniques you can do to memorize things. I know over 100 katas and different styles of martial arts and so on. But at the end of the day, it's a good example would be if every time you're going to do side control in class, try and face a certain direction in class and try and be in a certain area of the room. So if you know the coach is going to do side control, do that. And then when you think back to side control, you can remember everything from that point.
Oh, wow.
And that'll help. Take the time to list what you know. A lot of people say, for example, jiu-jitsu is infinite. And you say, cool, how many side control escapes do you know? And you go, 7. Well, there's a lot more than 7, but that's not infinite.
Yeah.
So categorize that stuff, categorize what you know. And what's funny about side control is, we all know Sure, there's like, you might know 7, but when I wrestle you, what are you going to do? You're going to hip escape and try and pull half guard. And then I'm going to block that, and then you're going to try and do that again, and then I'm going to block that, and you're going to try and do it again, and then you're going to try something random, and then go straight back to that hip escape, try to pull half guard. So how do you beat someone? You just work on what they're probably going to do. Working on high percentages is probably a good thing too. Once you've done a lot of training, sure, it's really interesting to look up different things about an art. But when you look at statistics and you go, well, rear naked choke's the #1 submission in MMA, jiu-jitsu, and judo. Maybe work on rear naked choke defense. Maybe work on how to do that better. If you have 20 hours this week and you're going to work out what you're going to spend your time on, I'd probably make sure that rear naked choke defense was in there, and maybe rear naked choke doing was there, because you want to accumulate as much of that as you can, because you know that works. You know it's hard to defend, so you know you want to get good at those things. And then once you've done your 10,000 reps or whatever else it is that you believe would be the number, add other things, but don't spend your time doing the latest, upside down reverse choke when we still know that that's not the high percentage choke.
Love
do
it.
the things that work the most. And if you do high percentage things, you get high percentage results.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I think we're nearly out of time, Geordie. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. I know originally we had attempted to get you and Jess on together, and logistically that was just not going to happen. But having talked with both of you, I'm so glad that we've had the opportunity to chat with you individually, because I don't think we would have had enough time to cover all of both of your knowledge and experience. Have you got any final words, any words of wisdom?
Oh, sorry. Words of wisdom, I don't know.
I think it's been full of them,
Maybe just chase your passion, chase your purpose, always train with purpose in mind, and understand your purpose can change. Work out what that is, and make sure you're moving closer to it every lesson, every day, every moment. And if you do that, then you'll be much more satisfied, much more happy, and you'll also know where your next step is, which is sometimes the biggest challenge. So thank you so much for having me on as well, guys.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you sort of working around my schedule. So thank you.
It's been a real privilege talking to you, man. I've known about you for a long time, but getting to discover a little bit about you, obviously you need to come back at some point, man. I really invite you to come back. I'm sure we've just scratched the surface, but you've got such great views, very different views to others, and that's what we're hunting is perspective. So thanks so much, man.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
So we'll have this out probably in a couple of weeks. If you could share it, that'd be awesome, because we're trying to grow our audience as best we can. So it'd be great.
Awesome.
Yeah, no problems.
All righty. Catch you later, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.